If you're into astrology, there's no doubt you'll have heard astrologers talking about the world-changing, paradigm-shifting, mind-bending significance of Pluto in Aquarius. And if you watch this channel, then I'm probably one of them. And there's good reason for that, because Pluto Aquarius, as I've taken to calling it, has repeatedly timed momentous periods in history, in which the structures of the world and our understanding of it were profoundly transformed. So the big question is, what does the current transit of Pluto through Aquarius, which will take us to the year 2044, promise for the world of today? But I've realized that we may actually already have the answers to this question, and they've been revealed to us in the unfolding of the past 15 years of history. What I'm going to show you in this episode is exactly what I mean by that. I'm going to show you the real key to understanding Pluto and Aquarius transits as they play out in history, and then we're going to think about what might be coming in the future. So welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. One of the historical episodes that tends to be spoken of by astrologers, including myself, as a Pluto and Aquarius story is the American Revolution. As most of you probably know, in 1789, the American Constitution came into force, Congress and the Supreme Court were established, and George Washington took his vows as the first president of the United States. And here's Pluto's position on April the 30th, 1789, when Washington was sworn in. It's well into Aquarius at 19 degrees of that sign. So what's wrong with saying the American Revolution is a Pluto in Aquarius story? Well, what's wrong with it is that the establishment of the US government was the outcome of a long struggle, one that began much earlier. Importantly, the American Revolutionary War began on April the 19th in 1775, but Pluto was still in late Capricorn at that time. And the same is true for the Declaration of Independence, which I probably don't need to tell you, came on July the 4th, 1776. We can go back further than that. For example, the Boston Tea Party came on December the 16th, 1773, with Pluto at 21 degrees of Capricorn. So we have to include what happened with Pluto in Capricorn for the story to make sense. So this leads us to the idea of considering Capricorn and Aquarius as two halves of one long sign. But why would that make astrological sense? If you're enjoying this video, please do click the like button down there and let YouTube know that. And please do consider subscribing to the channel and even activating notifications so you don't miss future episodes. But before we go on, I just want to tell you about the membership service I just launched, the World Astrology Report. This is a way for you to support my work should you wish, and in return you receive exclusive benefits. First of all, most of my videos from now on will have extended versions that will be available exclusively to members of my site. This option is perfect if you love history or if you're learning astrology yourself, because we'll go deeper into the subject matter to give you a better understanding of it. You'll also get access to an exclusive forum, the War Room, where we're building a community of people interested in the intersection of astrology, geopolitics, futurism, occultism, and all the stuff we talk about on this channel. And you'll get access to exclusive live streams, such as Q&A sessions, where you'll be able to ask me whatever you fancy. So please do consider joining me in the members area. I'd love to see you there, and I'd really appreciate the support. An exclusive extended version of this very episode is already uploaded in the members area and ready for you to enjoy. So thanks for listening, and let's get back to the subject of this video. In Capricorn, we have the sign that begins at the winter solstice. As an earth sign, it has to do with the tangible, the material, and the sensual. And it's a cardinal sign, meaning it has to do with initiation. Yet it's also feminine or yin, so it's receptive and inwardly oriented. It's considered to be beholden to the past, and in mundane astrology, it signifies large institutions, governments, banks, and so forth. But you might wonder, what does it mean for a sign to be both cardinal, i.e. concerned with starting things, and oriented to the past? I like to think of the new year here, which comes during Capricorn season. This is a time when people come up with resolutions, things they plan to do in the year to come. But resolutions are generally based on what has gone before, on what did or didn't work over the previous year. So what we begin in Capricorn season, in those cold days of early January, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, tends to be carried by the momentum that we built in the previous year. So it's less about new ideas and more about responding to the past and getting back to work as the new year begins. So keep the inward orientation of Capricorn in mind, because it will become important when we look at more historical examples. Now, a month after the winter solstice, the sun enters Aquarius. Aquarius is an air sign, and so it has to do with mental activity, ideas, and communication. And it's a fixed sign, and also a masculine or yang sign. And so it's more outwardly oriented than Capricorn, and unlike the sign of the sea goat, it looks to the future. Aquarius tends to have a vision of how the world should be structured, and Aquarians tend to stick rather tenaciously to their vision. It's the sign of the inventor, the outsider, and the revolutionary. Of the 12 zodiac signs, there's something special about Capricorn and Aquarius. And it's this: they're the only two consecutive signs that are both ruled by the same planet in traditional astrology, Saturn. And so there's a continuity between these two signs that you don't find with any other pair of consecutive signs of the zodiac. Any planet that transits through Capricorn and Aquarius will serve Saturn's agenda throughout its journey through the two of them. This is why I think it makes some sense to think of these two signs as one, as the domain of Saturn. Saturn was the outermost planet of the traditional cosmos, and so it's ultimately the very container of material reality, something I discussed in this recent video on Saturn as a feminine planet. The nature of Saturn is to take things slowly. It's interested in processes that play out over long periods of time. Its lessons often take a lifetime to learn. And so the idea that planets have to spend twice as much time moving through the domain of Saturn fits very well with its nature. Now, don't take what I'm saying here too literally. I'm not saying Capricorn and Aquarius are one sign. I'm just saying that thinking of them that way can bear fruit. This idea actually came to me vividly in a dream one night. And I think that when something like that happens, it's always worth taking the idea concerned seriously. Astrology is ultimately an art and science that helps us to identify, structure, and tell stories about the world. And I think the idea of Saturn's double-length domain is very useful for this purpose, because the American Revolution is just one of countless historical stories that played out over the course of Pluto's transit through these two signs. You probably know who this is, but you might not know where he got his name from. Tupac Shakur was named after this man, Tupac Amaru II, who was a tribal chieftain of the Taino people in Peru who lived in the 18th century, which at that time was part of the Spanish colonial empire. He was descended from Inca royalty. The Incas had been conquered by the Spanish during the previous Pluto and Aquarius transit of the early 16th century, when Lima was founded in 1535. As an aside, it seems Peru is highly resonant to Pluto and Aquarius, so expect to see dramatic developments there over the coming years. Now, in 1780, with Pluto and Aquarius, Tupac Amaru II launched a rebellion against Spanish colonial rule in Peru, leading 40 to 60,000 indigenous Peruvians in a fight against the Spanish military. But he was executed by the Spanish in 1781, and the rebellion ultimately failed. But once again, the story of this rebellion begins with Pluto in Capricorn, because in 1776, the government of Spain began to introduce what were called the Bourbon reforms in South America, and these reforms involved separating Upper Peru, today's Bolivia, and Argentina from the rest of Peru. Now, Upper Peru included the incredibly lucrative silver mines at Potosi, and the money from those mines now began to flow to Buenos Aires instead of Cusco and Lima in the west. But this change impoverished huge swathes of Peru and made life much more difficult for indigenous people, and these factors fed into Tupac's rebellion. So we can see a similar dynamic to what we saw with the American Revolution here. With Pluto in Capricorn, we saw an established central authority, in this case the Spanish throne, generating hardship and resentment. And with Pluto in Aquarius, we see an attempt to establish a new center, or perhaps more accurately in this case, to re-establish an old one. And when we journey back in time to even earlier Pluto cycles, we see the same pattern once again. But it's not only stories of political and geopolitical revolution that benefit from this framing. We can also see it with technology. Another event that astrologers tend to attribute to the last Pluto in Aquarius transit is the first industrial revolution. And it's true that the industrial revolution was getting into swing during the time that Pluto was in Aquarius, 1777 to 1798. But what were the major inventions that drove the industrial revolution? The two most important were James Watt's steam engine and the spinning jenny. Although steam engines were around from the 17th century, used mostly to pump water out of mines, it wasn't until Watt added a condenser to the steam engine in 1765 that the modern, more versatile device was really born. Here's Pluto at the time he did this, and you can see it was in early Capricorn. The other major invention was the spinning jenny, a mechanical device that made it far easier to make cloth and revolutionized the textiles industry. That device was invented by James Hargreaves in Lancashire, England in around 1764. Again, Pluto was in early Capricorn at that time. So the Industrial Revolution arguably got moving with Pluto in Capricorn, not Aquarius. Perhaps we might say that the effects of these inventions were really changing society and ideas about how it should be structured with Pluto in Saturn's air sign of Aquarius. But the inventions themselves came with Pluto in Capricorn, an earth sign more concerned with the tangible and the material. And so at this time, we saw the physical form of these transformational inventions taking shape. Compare this for a moment with our current time, because there are some interesting parallels with AI, for example. I hope I've shown you that this framing of Pluto transiting through the domain of Saturn is useful for understanding history. And in the extended version of this video, available now for members of the World Astrology Report Members Club, we'll go into more of these historical examples so you really get to understand how this pattern works. What we're going to do now is apply this frame of Pluto in the domain of Saturn to our current time and see how we can use it to predict the future. What we can take from this frame is that if we want to understand what may be coming down the line with Pluto in Aquarius, a good place to look is the history that unfolded while Pluto was in Capricorn. Simple. This applies to Pluto moving from Capricorn to Aquarius in a way that it wouldn't in transitions between other signs, when we don't have the continuity of having the same traditional ruler. Now, first we'll do a quick recap on Pluto's movements. Pluto moved into Capricorn for the first time this cycle on January the 26th, 2008. Right now, it's in Aquarius, of course, and it's been there since January 2024. And it spent about 11 weeks in the sign in 2023, from March the 23rd to June the 11th, in what we can look at as a kind of preview period of the transit to come. Remember, Pluto moves 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Pluto will spend one final period in Capricorn from September the 1st, 2024, this year, until November the 19th, 2024. So we aren't quite done with Pluto in Capricorn, but we already have a pretty good idea of what it was about and what the major themes and events were, although people's opinions on this will likely differ to some extent. But for me, the first thing that comes to mind is the 2008 financial crisis, which really got going right as Pluto was moving into Capricorn. I'm not a financial expert, but I think there were a couple of major consequences of that crisis that are worth bearing in mind to figure out where things might be going. The first is that governments bailed out failing banks to the tune of huge sums of money at the expense of taxpayers, and many of them instituted austerity policies after that, arguing that there was no longer any money for a lot of the public services that used to be available. All this led to big declines in trust in government, and One way that manifested was the Occupy Wall Street protest movement in 2011, but that movement dispersed without forcing much change, if any at all, on the financial system. The other key point is that one of the things governments did to accomplish that bailout was essentially to print large amounts of money, which was given the nicely sophisticated name of quantitative easing. QE dramatically increased once again during the recent pandemic, when government suddenly needed lots of extra money to prop up stuttering economies. Now, I'm no finance expert myself, but I am pretty good at seeing patterns. And in many of the Pluto and Capricorn stories we looked at earlier, we saw financial crises appearing and critiques of the established system, i.e. Capricorn, developing in response to those crises. It seems to me highly likely that with Pluto in Aquarius, we're going to see the chickens coming home to roost with regards to the 2008 financial crisis and the things that were done in response to it. And so I suspect that we're due for another crisis, and this one will likely be bigger than the first one, and more importantly, result in significant change to financial and possibly political systems too, in a way that the previous one didn't. When that crisis might come is, of course, another question, and one that I'm not going to try to answer right now. As an aside, I'd also point out that Bitcoin emerged in January 2009 with Pluto in early Capricorn. It's now moved into the heart of the financial system, and it's another very important factor to watch, but we'll get more into that some other time. What we'll look at next is some quite different developments that came with Pluto in Capricorn. We saw how the major technologies of the first industrial revolution, such as the Watt steam engine and the spinning jenny, were invented with Pluto in Capricorn. And we've seen something similar with the technological revolution that's happening at the moment. I'm thinking, of course, of the big developments we've seen in AI in recent years. Machine learning has been around for quite some time, but it was only relatively recently that it began to make great strides and became a technology that could do some impressive things. For example, it was in January 2021 that OpenAI released the first iteration of DALL-E, its generative AI tool that can produce images from text. Pluto was, of course, in Capricorn at the time. It will surely be with Pluto in Aquarius that the consequences of AI will really begin to be felt, and when resistance to the changes it drives will begin to gain traction. That includes resistance against the burgeoning AI-based surveillance state. This is probably true of the last Pluto in Aquarius transit. The first documented strike for higher wages in the United States happened in 1786, with Pluto in mid-Aquarius. As businesses try to replace human workers with AI, and as AI-based surveillance steps up, and as AI floods the internet with deception and fake news content, I think we can expect to see a lot of resistance. And we already have an omen suggesting that will be the case, because we've already seen the Hollywood writers' strike. And one of the demands of that protest was that film studios pledge not to replace writers with AI tools. The strike began on May 2nd, 2023, which was during the first short period when Pluto was in Aquarius last year. And so I think that's an omen of things to come. Now, there are countless examples like this. I've just highlighted a couple of them in this video. In the extended version, we cover some more, including some I suspect the YouTube algorithm probably doesn't like very much. Wink, wink. So I hope I've shown you what this frame of Pluto in the domain of Saturn can offer us as astrologers, or just people trying to understand where things are heading. It doesn't explain everything, and of course, if we want to make more precise predictions, we need to bring in other layers and techniques. I think it has a lot of value. In this video, I've highlighted a few examples from our current Pluto cycle that occurred to me, but there are definitely more. I'd be interested to hear what you think, and if you have more such stories from other parts of the world, for example. Thanks, and see you around very soon.